Good afternoon, grade 11s. Today should be Wednesday for you, and this is lesson 3. What we're going to do today is we are going to do a little adding and subtracting. So we're going back to grade 5, grade 4, where you learned how to add and subtract fractions. What we're going to do is have you just have a look at this. First, some basic steps in terms of adding and subtracting of fractions. We need to remember that we need to have a common denominator. So that's the first thing you need to remember. The rest of it you can go ahead and have a look at on your own. So what we're going to do, I just grab my pen here, and what we're going to actually do is we are going to just start with example number 1. We know we need to have a common denominator, and we need to make sure it's the lowest common denominator. So I am going to make that 15 on the bottom, and I know to get the other numbers to be equivalent, I have to say, hey, here's my 3. What do I have to multiply it by to get 15? And that would be 5. So then I would multiply the top by 5, and I would get 10. The same thing over here. What do I multiply by with 5 to get 15? That'd be 3. I multiply by 3 and I get 6. So when I add the two together, I end up with 16 over 15. I like improper fractions. We can leave it just the way it is. The next one, of course, we can multiply those two bottom denominators together, but we also know that we need to go with the lowest. So that would be 12. The same idea, 6 goes into 12 2 times, therefore this becomes 10. This becomes 3, 7 over 12. Now, this is pretty basic stuff, but we are going to use this shortly in terms of the units that we are with rational expressions, the unit we have been studying. All right, the next one, 8, 3, and 12. So the common denominator in this case would be 24, the lowest common denominator. I'm going to then go 8 into 24 is 3 times, so I'll multiply that by 3. 3 goes into 24 8 times, so I'm going to multiply this by 8, and 12 goes into 24 2 times, so I'll multiply this by 2. So what do I end up with? 21 minus 16 plus 10, and when I put those all together, I end up with a 15 over 24. Reduce it to its lowest terms. I get 5 over 8, and that's because 3 goes into both the top and the bottom. So that was pretty basic. That was, as I said, real review of fractions that you've had in the past. What we're going to do now is we are going to follow the same identical method, but we are going to use a non-variable denominator, meaning whole numbers on the bottom, but we're going to have some x's on the top. But the process is exactly the same. So if you have a look at the first question here in example number 2a, 4, 5, 10, the lowest common denominator would be 20. I'm going to throw that on the bottom. On the top, I say, okay, well, 4 goes into 25 times, so I'm going to multiply this by 5. So I'm going to end up with 15x. 5 goes into 24 times, so I'll multiply the top by 4, so I'm going to end up with a 4x. And 10 goes into 22 times, so it's going to be multiplied by 2 to have equivalent fractions. And there we have it. I collect all my like terms, and I end up with a 5x over 20, which needs to be reduced. 5 goes into itself once, 5 goes into 20 4 times. I end up with 1/4 x, or I can have it as an x over 4. Both of those are actually correct. All right, now let's keep going. Let's look at this next one, which is a common denominator. We have a 3 and a 6, so the common denominator will be 6. Let's put that at the bottom, and let's put everything else on top. 3 goes into 6 2 times, so I'm going to actually throw this time my 2 out front because I just need that extra step to make this easier to work with. Now 6 goes into 6 once, so really I'm not going to do anything with this bracket. I put a 1 out front just to remind you of it, but I don't really need to do much. This first expression, I'm going to take the 2 and multiply it throughout the bracket, so I'm going to get a 6a minus 2 plus 4a plus 5 all of it is over 6. Next step would be just to collect my like terms, and I end up with a 10a. Negative 2 plus 5 is plus 3, all over 6. Now, I cannot take this any further, and I want to remind you of that. If I tried to do this with a binomial on top, that would mean this number would have to go into this number and this number, and there is not a common factor that goes into all of those. So this is the answer right there. The next one, we're going to continue on. Now this one we don't have a common denominator with the 8 or the 3, so we're going to have to find something that will work for both, and that will be 24. So I'm going to put 24 at the bottom. Now, the same as what we've been doing, I go 8 goes into 24 3 times, so I am going to have 3 will need to be multiplied with the 8y minus 3. And I will also need to then look at this 3, it goes into 24 8 times. The 8 will go out in front, and I will need to multiply everything in the numerator by 8. If I do that, I will just take the 3 throughout the bracket. I'm going to get 24y minus 9. All I did was I multiplied these together through the bracket, and then I end up doing the same thing with the other bracket. I did 8 times 2 is 16y, and the 8 goes with the 1, and I end up with a negative 8 all over 24. Collect your like terms. 24y minus 16y will give me an 8y, and on the bottom, and then the numbers as well. So I end up with a 17, negative 17, and on the bottom I end up with a 24. Cannot reduce it. There is nothing that goes into this term, and this term. So we are done. All right, let's turn the page. Let's just continue a couple more examples. We're going to simplify, but now what we're going to do is just make it, just add a few extra little things along the way. I want you to remember that 3x really is 3x over 1. So when we find our common denominator, you need to remember that. Next step. All right, we have a 2, a 1, and an 8. So the common denominator is going to be 8. Put that here. Well, I'm going to try that again and try to make a little lower line. I put an 8. Now, I look at each of the denominators and I go, and there's a 1 there and there's an 8 there. So what do I need to do to the numerator to make it equivalent? So to go from 2 to 8, I need a 4 multiplied by 4. So that's what I'm going to do with this expression on top of the 2. So I'll put my 4 out front, and I'm going to multiply it by 7x plus 3. The next one, there is a 1 on the bottom. So to go from 1 to 8, I have to multiply by 8. So the next expression will be an 8 out front and in front of the 3x, and I'll multiply that later. And then the last one, well, 8 goes into 8 one time, so I don't really need to do anything here. I will put a 1 just to show you that it will go through the bracket. And that is good. The next step is to multiply those whole numbers through the bracket. So I end up with a 28x plus 12. All I've done is multiplied through the bracket. I also get a 24x, which would be the next term. Now this negative sign is where you have to be careful. This negative sign has to go through the bracket. So when I do that, I end up with a negative, whoops, I'll have to get my pen back. I have a negative x plus 3. And remember, that is still all over this denominator of 8. You will collect all your like terms, and I really encourage you to do this. I know you're going to copy what I have, but I really do need you to go through and make sure that you can do this step without me leading you. And the answer will be 51x plus 15. The next one's very similar, just a couple little things. Notice in this case we have a 4, not an x on top. So remember, this 4 really means 4 over 1. We have a 9 and a 3. So the common denominator, of course, will be 9. So I'll put that at the bottom. I now go to my first term. So recognize that these are all individual terms that are separated by negative signs. The first term then will have to be multiplied by 9 because 1 goes into 9 times. So I'm going to have a 9, grab my black pen. 9 has to be multiplied by 4. Now 9 goes into 9 one time, so I'll just throw this 1 in front and I'll just have a y minus 4. And then the next term, 3 goes into 9 3 times, so I'm going to have to multiply the top by 3. This is just a basic equivalent fractions. Once I have that, I'm going to go and multiply through the bracket. So I'm going to end up with a negative y. This y, now just be careful here. This blue. This negative sign has to go with this negative sign. I better fix that. Oh, give me a second to do that. There's the line. And this is a minus 1 here. All I wanted to point out to you was this negative and this negative are going to have to cancel each other out. So I have a negative y and I have a positive 4. The 3 goes with the 5, so that's 15. Again, we've got two negatives here, so it's going to be plus 9y. And I have to really emphasize that because this is where in the past, there are mistakes that can be made. Collect your like terms. I put my y's always in front, or my one that has the variable, the coefficient with the variable, and I need to add 25 to that, and over the bottom, and the 9 goes as the denominator. That is all. Can't do anything more, and that is it. What I would encourage you to do right now is just take a couple minutes and try some questions 1 to 3 before you watch the rest of this video. So you feel free to stop it at this point. All right, the next step will be adding and subtracting with common denominators. But notice on the bottom now we don't have whole numbers, but we have x's, or we'll have monomials, or we'll have binomials. So same idea, we need to have common denominators. So in this next step, x of course will, the x will be the common denominator. So I'm going to put an x on the bottom. And all I need to do is say, hey, well, this has an x, this has an x, and this has an x. So all I do is add the tops. 2 plus 7 minus 1 equals 8 over x. That is the answer. But because we have an x on the bottom or an unknown on the bottom, we need to write our non-permissible values. We need to let us know what is not acceptable, and of course in this case x cannot equal 0, so we have to throw that in these particular examples. The next one, 2a's on the bottom, so we're good here. I'm just going to add the tops. 5a plus 3 plus a minus 6. Everything has the same denominator, so I can just add the tops together. I end up with a 6a minus 3 all over 2a. Can't do anything more, and a cannot equal 0. Because if I put a 0 in there, then we would have an invaluable answer. Next one, we have a 3y minus 1. That is going to be our common denominator on this case. We're doing the same thing. However, what we're going to find is we have to just be real careful with signs, and it just keeps getting a little bit more challenging. 3y minus 1 is the common denominator. Oh, what do you know? I have 3y minus 1 and 3y minus 1. I can cancel those out, and I'm left with an answer of 1. Now, the thing is, though, we still have to do our non-permissible, and I have to set that 3y minus 1 on the bottom to equal 0 to find out what y cannot equal. And in this case, it's 1/3. Last one, same idea. I probably am going to run out of time, so at this point, I think I'll just stop, and I'll continue that on the next video.